In October of 2024, I played and reviewed the remake version of the original Resident Evil game to the highest praises. It was the game that introduced me to an entire video game franchise, and an entire video game genre for that matter. It had a great gameplay loop that fits perfectly with the player characters and the environments you traverse, a great atmosphere, challenging but doable puzzles, two compelling protagonists, and a duo of surprisingly lovable supporting characters that filled the game with heart and depth. Now, I never spoke in that video what was exactly the thing that took me the longest to accomplish in that game, something that I continued doing long after uploading the video, and that was saving Rebecca. That was the biggest challenge for me throughout the whole campaign. First, she died at this moment, mainly because I saved the game before heading out to rescue her. Then I couldn't play for 2 nights straight, and by the time I returned to the game, I had forgotten that she was in peril and thus continued my merry way to the laboratory to finish the game. I realized my folly too late, and since she was nowhere present at the ending, then she couldn't trigger the self-destruct command in the Umbrella laboratory, and I got an extremely anticlimactic ending in which I could only save Jill, but Rebecca was dead and the tyrant unleashed. So before doing anything else, I searched for help on the internet, found the location of her demise, and reloaded the nearest save to save Rebecca, and then had to replay the entire lab section so she would appear on the conclusion of the game, only to get shot by Wesker, who hates her for some reason and wanted to spite Chris, and then, in the final battle with the Tyrant, she gets impaled by its claws after just 2 consecutive blows, forcing me to replay the entire lab section again because I had no ink ribbons left and couldn't save before the final battle, only for this to happen again and again before finally being able to defeat the monster, and the only way I could do that was by staying close to it, taking hits and never letting it get close to Rebecca, because the moment that happens, she dies. My mistake, to be fair, was trying to play this final section the same way I did with Jill. Barry Burton is way hardier than Rebecca, so you can have him distract the Tyrant while you shoot it from a distance. But with Rebecca, you cannot rely on the same strategy, because she gets 2-shot by the Tyrant almost immediately. You, as Chris, have to be the one to waltz around with the beast, shooting it with everything you have left by that moment in the game, hoping that Brad drops you the nuke so you can finally blow this Wesker fucking demon to Kingdom Come. Little did I know that the pain was just beginning, because soon after I learned that in Resident Evil 0 you play as no other than Rebecca Chambers herself. My initial reaction was good.
Well, I'm glad you're okay. No more following. Just stay with me, kid.
That's my plan, sir.
I thought this to be good because now I can control her myself and keep her from getting herself into trouble. How wrong I was. This is not a review of Resident Evil 0. This is, in truth, the story of my pain, my agony, as I played the Kill Rebecca simulator. On surface level, the gameplay looks and feels very similar to RE1 Remake. You're thrown into this game world without much hint of what to do and where to go, and you have to start figuring out things as you go on. You fight monsters with an assortment of weapons, solve a healthy amount of puzzles, and unveil a mystery all the while. Most of the time the game is good and fun to play. Simply said, this is more of the RE1 Remake gameplay that you certainly enjoyed very much if you decided to buy and play this particular game. However, there are a few differences that had me both smiling and grimacing simultaneously. The negative ones were ones that made me ask myself on several occasions, why? Why did they do this? The first one is very obvious, and anyone that has played this game has criticized the same thing: the lack of item boxes. In Resident Evil 0, there are 0 item boxes, which quickly becomes a pain. To make things worse, in this game large items take up to 2 of your 6 item slots, reducing even more the things that you can carry at any given time. so item boxes are even more necessary for that reason, but there aren't any in this game. The item boxes is like the cherry on top of the cake in the first game. It is what makes the convoluted and challenging gameplay of RE1 Remake manageable, because you have access to all of your stuff each time you encounter an area with an item box, maintaining the flow of the game and reducing backtracking by a ton. It's not realistic, but neither is not being able to walk while shooting, and it was necessary to keep the game flowing while maintaining a sense of balance within its difficulty. It was always relieving to explore new areas with increasing amounts of enemies, running out of resources and all of a sudden entering a safe room to realize that once again you have access to all of your stored medicine, ammo and ink ribbons to save your progress. You check your map, plan your route, pick what you think we'll need for this next run, save the game, and then head out to face more perils. The save room with the item boxes is an essential part of what made RE1 an eerily beautiful experience for me, similar to the bonfires in Dark Souls. Now, imagine a Dark Souls with a bonfire that doesn't restore your health, or refill your Estus flasks, or allow you to level up. That would be a severe downer for any Soulsborne player, right? So the same happens here, in RE0, with the lack of item boxes. Another thing that bothered me while playing this game was the level design, which in many cases is designed to be frustrating without giving you a valid reason as to why. In a game in which you control two characters, most corridors and rooms are extremely constricted, and always with obstacles to make moving around them very difficult. Add to that the larger amount of enemies in this game, and it is always almost guaranteed that you are going to take damage in most of these rooms and corridors. At first, this makes sense, because the game starts in the iconic train sequence and trains are very constricted areas by necessity. However, the second chapter takes place in the Umbrella Academy, and that place has so many tight corridors that makes you wonder how easy that this was a school to begin with. This was the academy that trained the future leaders of Umbrella Corporation. Albert Wesker was trained in this building. So how is it that the building is so tight and claustrophobic? How could a considerable amount of students move and live in that place? It doesn't make sense. But in order to make the game harder, they just make everything tight and constrictive so that each character gets in the way of the other and make it almost impossible to avoid damage from enemies. There was this area, the one behind the water door, that is so claustrophobic, and almost all the rooms and corridors have at least one of easily the strongest enemy in the entire game. These pain in the asses that resist almost anything and rarely budge when shot at. These guys are everywhere, and moving past them without taking hits is not an easy thing, particularly because they have long-reaching arms that can hit you from a distance. This sequence would have been slightly more manageable if you sent only one of the two characters, but the thing is that there is a puzzle in one of the rooms that require you to use both characters, so you have to send the two together, making it more likely for the enemies to grab one of them and drain them of their health. Even worse than that, once you've been mauled by these beasts way too many times, you find this room that has healing equipment and ammo for your weapons. However, as soon as you go out again, another of these slime fox is waiting for you, ready to hit you once or twice before you can even react, draining you of almost all the health you just recovered. And this is not the only time that they have enemies spawn on places where it is virtually impossible to avoid them. There is this other section, the training area, where you find the water key and they throw two hunters at you. The cutscene is made in a way that one of these bastards is going to be right next to you, so you immediately take damage the moment gameplay resumes. This game simply enjoys draining your health, spawning enemies out of nowhere that will get lucky hits on you each and every time they appear. Even so, after struggling for 3 or 4 nights in a row, I finally managed to find the tablet that I needed to finish my collection and open the door for the next part of the game, only to find myself in the brick wall that we all know as the giant bat at the chapel. I was low on ammo, low on health, and I had the misfortune of sending Rebecca, the weakest of the two characters, into the chapel, only to find a safe room with no healing items, a few shotgun bullets for a shotgun that Billy had outside, and then save the game only to realize that I had locked myself within a death trap because now I had this giant beast blocking the exit and sweeping Rebecca off her feet. I tried to fight the beast several times, but it was impossible. I figured that since Billy had a shotgun and slightly more health, then he should be the one to fight the beast. That way, I managed to get Rebecca out of the chapel, swap places with Billy, and then had him tackle the beast by himself. At first, it all seemed futile. Billy could only sustain 2 to 3 blows before dying, and dying I did a lot. But eventually, I started getting the rhythm. I implemented my Dark Souls mindset, all the gods and glories that had me beat majestic bosses like Grey Wolf Sith and the Knight Artorias, and it worked. I managed to land shots at the bat before it could get close enough to hit me or carry me away, and I almost thought I would triumph. But then, the artificial difficulty that has characterized this game from early on had to take over again, and now, for no apparent reason, the giant bat is begetting lots of vampire bats that mess up my aim and drain my health with alarming speed. This is the true brick wall in this fight. To be honest, moments like this bother me even more than the lack of item boxes, and they had me frequently asking myself, why? This is not fun. This is not challenging. This is obtuse. In RE1 Remake, the control was always in your hands, and you failed because you panicked and started making mistakes, not because the game had artificial and unforgiving difficulty. In RE1, even the fastest enemies would give you a slight hint of their presence before attacking you, whether that be breathing or groans or footsteps, because in a game system in which rooms are separated by load screens, you are always in a vulnerable position the moment you enter that room, and if the designers put enemies right there, you're most likely going to get hit, or perhaps even killed before you gain full control of your character again. You can have enemies hide behind the door when the game world is interconnected, because the control is still in your hands, and as such you can seamlessly run back to the previous corridor and lure the enemy away from its initial crafty position. But in games like RE0, in which rooms load separately, you can't do that, so you're condemned to get stun-locked and killed before even starting to get your bearings in this new environment. The game world was better designed in RE1 than in 0. Areas were tight only when they made sense, like overstuffed rooms, but not every single place had to be tight or overstuffed. The game was better designed because it had more options to choose from. If you were skilled enough with the controls and stoic enough to await slow-walking enemies without panicking or losing your patience, you could try to avoid enemies altogether, luring them to specific areas and running around them. In RE1, you also had the defense weapons, which also expanded your options when engaging the enemy. I can shoot this zombie with my gun and use my grenade to blow this other to pieces. Or maybe I choose to take a hit because I have more healing items than ammo at this point. RE1 was fun because it gave tools to play around with, and it gave you a game world that made sense. It was a challenging game world for sure, but it was designed for you to exploit it if you knew how. However, none of these strategies are as viable in 0 as they are in RE1, because the corridors are too tight and there are too many enemies all the time, or they are simply too big to avoid. The gameplay therefore is often reduced to you choosing between ammo or healing items. That's mostly it. Boss fights is another thing RE1 did well and better than the prequel, because it never traps you within one of these fights, unlike the giant bat in 0. The giant serpent is waiting for you in a particular room in the mansion, and it is guarding one of the items that you need to continue the game. But you battle that creature when you are ready. If you don't have enough resources, you can continue exploring a little bit more to see if you find any, or go to your item box and gather what you need for the fight. The giant plant boss fight is easily my favorite of the entire game, and mainly because of how different it plays out depending on the protagonist you choose and the choices you make throughout the game. Jill can fight the beast head-on, but she can also make the fight easier if she makes the V-Jolt to weaken the plant first, so you have options to pick from. Chris can't make the plant poison because he doesn't have enough chemistry knowledge, but Rebecca could if you accept her help early in the game. It is this mix and match of choices between puzzles, combat, resource managing and timing what makes the first RE game so interesting and fun to play. But imagine if the boss fights were to require one particular weapon or ammo type. The fun factor, the replay factor, all of that would be lost or at least tarnished to a considerable degree. All of these thoughts rummaged through my brain as I continued tackling the giant bat boss fight for a few more nights. Eventually, I had to accept that this fight was mathematically impossible, and when I realized that something is mathematically impossible, I started seeking other solutions. For the first time since starting the game, I sought a guide in the Steam community, and shortly after found out that many of my problems were common problems that plenty of RE0 players have had across the years. I learned that the giant bat is invincible in the hardest difficulty, unless you have the napalm grenades, which I didn't, because I had used them before to battle the endless streak of Mimicry Marcuses. The game is so adamant on launching at you, which is great, because it is really such a good idea to give players a lot of cool and useful weapons and tools, and then tell them not to use them because they have to hoard them for an obtuse boss fight that can only be beaten with a specific weapon or ammo type 10 or 15 hours into the game. And to make things even worse, I learned that shortly after I would need of the grappling hook to continue the game, and this one was sitting docking in the main hall of the Umbrella Academy, too far for my characters, low on health and ammo, to reach, particularly now that infected baboons were waiting for me outside the observatory. To be fair, my mistake had been trying to play this game for the first time on the hardest difficulty. I reckoned I could, because I played the first game on the hardest difficulty from the get-go, and I was fine. But RE0 is considered one of the hardest games in the franchise, and all guides indicate that it is a severe rookie mistake trying this game on hard for the first time, that doing so will immediately tarnish the whole experience. Another thing the guides say is that it is always better trying to kill as much enemies as possible with a knife, since it is the only weapon in the game that doesn't need of ammo. To be honest, I didn't use the knife much in the first game, because I never really needed to. I mostly avoided enemies in that game, and when I had to fight one, I would carefully pick my weapons and destroy only the monsters that I had to without overspending one type of ammo over the other. However, in doing that, I deprived myself of practice with the knife, and that lack of experience had now taken its toll on me in this other, harder game. And so I had two options. Either drop the game and apologize to my viewers for promising a video that I couldn't make, or restart the game on the easiest difficulty, learn the ropes of this program, get good with a knife, and accumulate as much resources as I could for the boss fights. Needless to say which path I chose, and thus began the second stage of my peculiar journey to Resident Evil 0. I didn't play for a couple of weeks because by then it was Christmas time and this season is relentless. I have a large family, so that means a lot of gift wrapping and card writing. Eventually, when things settled down a little, I could resume my RE0 project. By then, I had fully come to terms with the decision to restart the whole game, and had come to terms with the humbling reality that now I would regard the sky blue letters of easy mode in my save list, always reminding me of my humbling defeat, instead of the crimson red that characterizes the hardcore player. However, with the experience of having played half the game on the hardest difficulty, trudging through familiar territories quickly became a fast and easy stroll, and I did the whole train sequence during the first night. I remembered how to solve the puzzles, where the enemies would spawn, and now the game was dropping more loot, so I always had plenty of everything in case I needed it. A little problem that I had, on the other hand, was that since I was actively choosing not to use as much resources as possible to keep them for the late game, then I always had more than I could carry, and since there are no item boxes in this game, the main hall of the academy quickly became messier than a child's playroom. All the while, I stuck to the knife, taking down as much enemies as I could with it, and using other weapons only when it was strictly necessary. It certainly helped that during that time, I had recently gotten the original trilogy from GOG as a Christmas gift, and in replaying the already familiar first game with mostly the knife, I had a familiar playground to practice and hone this new skill, a skill that will most likely help me through the future programs. Another thing that I learned during this second playthrough was to fully embrace the dual protagonist gameplay. A mistake that I did the first time was to try and play the game like RE1. Since Billy is the hardier of the two protagonists, then I would leave Rebecca beside a typewriter and have Billy explore on his own. However, this strategy, albeit useful at times, is not always good, because there are simply too many enemies in the game for one character to take down safely, and what I ended up doing was shooting everything and wasting a lot of ammo in the process. With the two protagonists, however, it is safer to explore because they can better handle the hordes of enemies the game will throw at you. I quickly learned that the best combo between Billy and Rebecca was to have him at the front slashing at enemies with a knife, while Rebecca shoots them from afar with her gun. That way, slashing Billy would weaken the enemies, reducing the ammo she had to spend, and whenever one of the zombies grabbed him, she would shoot it off of him. So it was a viable strategy that made exploration faster, easier, and all the more engaging. All the while, knowing that I would need tools like the grappling hook for later in the game and the rocket launcher for the giant bat and other boss fights, I then, gradually, would have them carry these items to the observatory, along with other resources like medicine and ink ribbons, in order to have these items closer to the next area of the game, where I would need them more later. Doing this saved me a lot of backtracking. And to play it even more thoroughly, before continuing the game I returned to clear the baboons, while I was still healthy enough, before locking myself in the chapel where the giant bat would be waiting for me. In the easiest difficulty, and within a palm grenades, I could take down the giant bat in a single try. After that moment, the rest of the game was new for me, and I could finish with little effort. Easy mode in this game is easy indeed. After finishing the game, I immediately played Leash Hunt, found almost all the leashes, unlocked my infinite ammo, an early game magnum gun, and the next evening I went back to that save file, hoping to tackle the hard mode with my unlimited ammo and get a dose of revenge. Only to find out that I couldn't because the game, unlike the first one, doesn't let you choose your difficulty within a finished save. So everything you unlocked in that save file is locked within the chosen difficulty, which is an obvious bummer, and yet another thing that I could do in the first game that I can't here. This is weird, because RE1 Remake and Zero were developed simultaneously, while being overlooked by the same guy. How can these two games be so similar, yet so different? In any case, the only thing I could carry with me to hard mode was the experience. This wasn't the revenge trip that I had planned. This is what I had in mind.
Gee, that's funny. I've never seen garbage eat garbage before. Oh, God! This order's to go.
That's not exactly what I got in the end, but these games are the type that improves with replays. Now I understood how to fight with the knife, better spend my resources, and use my characters more strategically, combining them in ways that would have the enemies always guessing where the next blow would come. My second attempt at hard mode was so much smoother than the first time because I had the experience to better tackle the challenge, and it was more fun than easy mode, simply because easy is kind of boring. I could beat Dark Souls without breaking my controller. Easy mode in any game just doesn't do it for me anymore. RE0 as a whole is an inferior game to RE1 Remake. From the writing to the world design to the difficulty scaling, most things about the first game are better there than in the prequel. Even so, I do not regret a moment spent playing this game. Artificial difficulty is something that I have always hated and always will. And I still believe that this game's over-insistency on hoarding resources solely for the boss fights is a severe design error because RE1 was heavy on resource managing, but it still gave you room to play around with your tools. However, the grueling difficulty of Zero forced me to become good with this game and gather mindsets and skills that I will carry on to the future games, and that is something for which I am thankful. And to be honest, not all things about this game are negative, and some things in fact are actually better here than in the first game. For example, this game is even more beautifully rendered than the first game, taking full advantage of the high-definition treatment. In this game, the pre-rendered backgrounds are so detailed and animated that they might confuse you at times for full three-dimensional landscapes. That train sequence at the beginning is the perfect example to that. The game always maintains the movement of the train and the constant effects of the rain, even when pausing the game to present descriptions. Even if that momentum slows down when arriving at the academy, and thus the game starts looking more like a less inspired rehash of the Spencer Mansion in the original game, the graphical improvement of this prequel is evident, even on later sequences. In terms of mechanics, one of the things this game does better than the first one is the capacity of dropping items on the ground and making space for new ones. This is obviously a necessity in Zero, once again due to the lack of item boxes. However, this is also convenient during most scenarios because you can always drop what you don't need at the moment to pick what you need more. Another useful addition in this game is the ability to use items the moment you find them without having to pick them up first. This is extremely useful when you find healing items that you will most probably use immediately. All of these things were impossible to do in the first game. It was often the times in which I was in a new area, wounded, and encountered that blessing healing herb or that essential ink ribbon, but couldn't pick it up because I had no more room in my inventory. And instead of simply using the item without picking it up first, or allowing me to drop another item so that I can pick this one that I need more now, I had to instead leave the item where it was, backtrack half the mansion to an item box to make room, and then go back to pick what was left behind. This is something that is definitely improved in RE0. The obvious and certainly the strongest sales point of this game is the opportunity to play with two characters simultaneously. In the first Resident Evil, you could choose between Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine at the start of the game, each character providing you with a slightly different story and gaming experience. In Resident Evil 0, however, you only get one campaign, in which you start as Rebecca Chambers from RE1, and shortly after you are introduced to a new character, Billy Cohen, a former Marine turned fugitive. The game is built around the idea of playing with two characters. Now, since this game is old school like the first one, then the game is very vague in explaining how the characters work, separately and in unison, and it is up to the player to figure out the full potential of the game. I suspect that most of the gripes that some players have with this game are mainly for that reason, because I struggled at first with the game for the same reasons. Controlling two characters at the same time can feel overwhelming. When playing as one, in the classic RE style, is overwhelming enough by itself. I've read people complaining about the partner character always picking fights and wasting ammo when the player wanted to avoid conflict altogether. Know that to avoid that type of problem, it is imperative to remember that you can customize your partner's AI behavior at all times, so that you can better plan your strategies when going forward. If you need your two characters to carry items, but don't want both to be attacking and wasting ammo, then choose your fighter and tell the other one to remain quiet during combat. Tinkering with the AI will help a lot, and the best thing about it is that each character has his or her own memory. so you can command different things to each one of them, and they will remember it separately. For example, you can command partner Billy to fight, while commanding partner Becca to remain idle, and each character will remember those orders the next time they become partners. In case you need to directly control your partner, you can do so with the right stick in your controller, negating their automated actions immediately. I know that's easier said than done, but it is still an option if you want both characters to fight but choose to run away at some point, or don't want Rebecca to shoot down at the zombies while Billy stabs them on the ground. The worst thing you can do in this game is try to play like the first Resident Evil, with the addition of a companion character now, because this game simply is not designed to provide the same exact experience as the first one. Like you already know if you watched the whole video, this is a lesson that I learned the hard way. My playthrough with Zero improved tenfold when I stopped thinking about the first game and how it did things better, and when I started embracing the differences of this prequel. Even more so, I stopped regarding the game solely as a surviving horror experience and more like a role-playing tabletop adventure. In Dungeons & Dragons, you create characters with specific skills and build parties combining different talents. Even if you can dual or multi-class, and sometimes it is good to have various abilities, feats and spells in one singular character, it is often better to compromise with one class and maximize the potential of that particular class. In Resident Evil 1, both Jill and Chris are fairly rounded characters, even if they have their particularities that can provide significant differences across the entire playthrough. They are still fully capable of solving the game by themselves. Chris can mix herbs, even if he is not as versed in science as Jill, and Jill can push all sorts of obstacles, even if she is not as hardy as Chris. But in Zero, Billy and Becca are way more dependent on one another. Rebecca is more of a D&D cleric. She is extremely weak, exemplified in her not being able to push anything above her height, thus requiring of Billy to do much of the heavy lifting. However, Billy, who is more of a D&D fighter, with perhaps a few levels on thievery, has zero knowledge on science, thus he cannot mix even the simplest of herbs, reducing his options considerably when it comes to healing his wounds. Rebecca also has chemical equipment, allowing her to carry healing recipes for poison and the like separately from the rest of her inventory. On the other hand, Billy has a lighter, which allows him to light candles and thus gain access to specific rooms throughout the environments, while Rebecca's size and lightweight makes her the only one of the two to be able to access other areas in the game. There are some puzzles that only Billy can solve with his lighter, and some others that only Rebecca can solve with her chemical equipment and lighter weight. Much of the gameplay revolves around you combining your characters to do different things depending on their strengths and weaknesses. Since resources are scarce, and Billy is the hardiest of the two characters, I would sometimes send him ahead to scout the area, defeat the enemies if necessary, and then I would call Rebecca so she would pick the keys and help solve the puzzles. This is something that you certainly cannot do in the first game because you have one character and that one character must do everything, fight and carry items all at the same time. Another thing that was very convenient in Zero that you cannot do in the first game is having one of the characters posted with ink ribbons besides the typewriter. On several occasions I would send Billy to explore on his own with the guns, and I would leave Rebecca posted besides the typewriter. That way, I will be able to save the game before attempting risky things with Billy, unlike the first game in which you had to take all the risks first and then return to the nearest save room to save, risking losing progress if you died in between. This tabletop style of design allows for a lot of emergent gameplay type of situations, aside of the scripted moments and puzzles that require of a particular character or both to solve. One of those interesting scenarios that happened all by itself was when I found the Obedience tablet during my first playthrough. Rebecca was the one carrying it, so I sent her to the observatory to put the tablet in its place and make room for new things. However, the wide anterior room to the observatory was now filled with giant bugs. Running past them and into the destination wasn't the problem. The problem was that in this game, Unlike the first one, enemies remain in the exact position where they were the last time you visited a room. So that means that if they follow you to a door, they will be waiting for you once you return. I didn't know at that time that the way you reset rooms is by swapping between characters, and usually the room will be reset when you return. So in simple words, Rebecca at that time was stranded in the observatory. So what did I do then? I called on Billy to distract the box away from the observatory door, and had him escape the room through a door that leads outside to the terrace. The problem was that now he is the one stranded with the box blocking the exit. So what I did was have Rebecca leave the observatory with the box far away on Billy's door, climb down the stairs to the first floor, go outside the academy, raise Billy an elevator that led up to the terrace, and lower him back to safety. All of this happened within gameplay. None of this was scripted or even a puzzle that you have to solve with the two characters. Moments like this demonstrate the potential and beauty of this game, very much like a D&D role-playing game. As I already said, the worst thing that you can do in this game is try to play RE0 like RE1. By embracing the differences, by embracing the two protagonists and constantly experimenting and building strategies around them, you will make the experience way more unique and memorable. The story of Resident Evil 0 is nothing to write home about, although it added interesting background to the Umbrella Corporation and the incidents of the first game. Some elements about it, particularly the character of Rebecca, barely matched together. An interesting aspect of the story, though, was seeing it from Wesker's vigilant eye as he spies upon the two protagonists. It was eerie each time the view would shift from normal to camera filter and the Umbrella people behind the screens. However, for the most part the story wasn't anything special, and the Soprano guy and his story was really not as interesting as the Trevor family and the Spencer-mentioned history of the first game. As a villain, this guy was completely laughable, which is jarring considering his grim backstory. You have characters like Lisa Trevor in the first game, which is actually scary and yet so sad at the same time once you learn her story. She is consistent. On the other hand, Wesker is suave and elegant, yet unsympathetic and outright menacing all at once. I was genuinely unnerved every time I encountered this guy throughout the game, his dark and mysterious personality and attire making a stark contrast from Rebecca and Barry, who always uplifted the scene with their likable personalities. But Soprano guy didn't do it for me. He was not as interesting as Wesker, nor was he as compelling as Lisa Trevor. From his Hanna-Barbera laughter to his singing moments, because he actually sings, this guy had me rolling the eyes each and every time he appeared.
Dr. Marcus?
It is worth pointing out, however, that RE1 is a remake. It already had the blueprints upon which to expand and make an even better game, adding more elements to the gameplay, like the defense weapons on the Crimson Heads, and elements to the story like the character of Lisa Trevor, and so on. In the original game, Wesker wasn't anywhere near as interesting and imposing as he is in the remake.
What is this?
Wow, what a mansion!
What is this place?
Not quite your ordinary house, that's for sure.
Captain Wesker, where's Chris?
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris is...
Hey, Wesker, where's Chris?
Jill, no! You don't want to go back out there.
RE0, however, is an original story, and as such, The story is what it is, good or bad from the get-go, without having the benefit of an older version to expand upon. That is why video game remakes, when done right, can easily become some of the best games of all time, because they are expanding upon something that was already great, fixing the quirks of the original, and adding material that was missing from the original experience. But when all is said and done, the standout for me was the two protagonists with which I played throughout the whole campaign. Rebecca we already know from the first game, and she is as likable here as she was before. I liked that the prequel remains consistent to her character, at least gameplay-wise, and that they managed to tell a story with Rebecca and develop the gameplay around her without transforming her into a copy of Jill Valentine. Rebecca feels different, both in the story and the gameplay, and I constantly felt, for both good and ill, that I was playing the same character that I interacted with in RE1, the consistently smart, clerical character of the first game, versed in science but weak in combat. Billy Cohen is also an interesting character that I enjoyed playing as in this game. I liked that his personality was different to that of Chris, creating contrast between the forwardly, brotherly star agent and his own, darker but in the end more romantic personality. At first, he is enigmatic and scary, but quickly reveals his softer sides and starts helping Rebecca. Eventually, he even opens up a little and reveals a bit more of his backstory and what truly happened for which he is being persecuted in the present. By the end, I was shipping for these two, and proud that Rebecca pays him back rightfully after everything he did for her. Even if the character exploration in this game is very basic, there were some moments between these two characters that were surprisingly impactful, even giving me some sense of time vibes. Sometimes, a game that doesn't try to be dramatic can turn out to be more dramatic than those that try too hard. Rebecca was a refreshing character to play as in 2024 and 2025, and more so when put in contrast to other, more renowned and acclaimed characters. The thing is that for as complex and well written as these characters can seem at times, that's exactly the problem. These characters, particularly the modern female characters, are so complex, so exhaustingly convoluted and have so many issues that they stop looking human. They at times look more like a stereotype written by a self-aware male writer than a real human being, because human beings are not as complex as these supposedly realistic characters, because human beings have real-life concerns to keep them on track. Real life just doesn't allow you to waste away in self-indulgent melodramas, and real-life family and friends are simply not as tolerant as fictional family and friends can be. When looking back at characters like Rebecca, I'm reminded of the beauty that comes through simplicity, that sometimes a small cutscene can do more for a story and a character than 1,000 lines of dialogue and Oscar bait performances. These developers understood that the core foundation of a character is to make her likable, not flawed or complex, because a flawed or complex character doesn't guarantee a likable character, but a likable character usually develops complexity throughout time, and with said complexity comes human flaws. That is why a character like Ezio is so beloved, because he was a likable and relatable guy before being complex. On the other hand, characters like Jason Brody are more divisive, and the main reason is, in my opinion, because he was written as a complex character first, but afterwards wasn't given enough redeemable qualities. Don't get me wrong, he is still a good character and easily the best Far Cry protagonist, but not a likable character. Rebecca Chambers, on the other hand, is a likable character, first and foremost, and that is the most important thing. Everything else follows naturally. The irony is that this is not the type of character that will be remembered for outstanding writing and the most dramatic performances. But sometimes that's better, because what is usually is better because it is simpler and thus more honest. Her love story with Billy is not one that will be remembered, but it was honest, and that's all that matters in the end. I know that RE0 is not everyone's favorite game, but to be honest, I liked this game very much and enjoyed my time with it. Yes, I missed the item boxes, and removing them from this game was a mistake, but by doing so the game differentiates itself from other games in the franchise and allows for different types of scenarios with different types of decision making throughout. Being able to play as two characters at the same time was, in my opinion, a brilliant idea, and the core gimmick that makes this game different and good. This is something that I would definitely like to see again in some form in a future RE title. Is this game as good as RE1? No, but it's good enough, and most of the game's drawbacks can actually become its strengths if you approach them under a different light. As I already said, embrace the game for its differences, and you will find yourself loving it. I don't know if this was a matter of doing the right thing at the right time, but the Resident Evil games have clicked with me. The first game was one of my favorite games of last year, and with this one, I started the year strong. The gameplay surprised me for how fun it is. After having fully finished 2 of these games, I simply want more of them. But even more than that, what I like is the vibe of these games and the characters. Chris, Jill, Barry, Becca, and Billy. All of these were characters that I liked very much, and I can't wait to meet Claire and Leon. Lately, characters in recent media have become somewhat of a mixed bag for me. They are never really likable, and I always approach them expecting the worst. With these 2 games, however, I felt safe with the characters, enjoying my time with them in the safety that they wouldn't betray my trust with needless subversions and the pandering that infect present-day media. It's funny how surprised I was to find out that the characters in these games are clean-cut heroes that simply want to do the right thing without the need of convoluting them to a point that they stop appearing human, that the men are masculine, the women feminine, and that their nature doesn't deprive them of anything, but instead enhances them as individuals. Many modern stories chastise people for being who they are. Some stories portray masculinity as a bad thing, even taking pains to mock it and punish it, while other stories portray women as faulty by nature and men as the obviously superior beings, always better at everything, even at raising kids. But in these Resident Evil games that I have played, both men and women are regarded as equals. They are both relevant to the story, necessary for one another's survival, and in the end, strong, smart, and successful, not despite, but because of their differences. Very much like real life, these men and women are both capable of accomplishing the same things, only in different ways. I said it in the first RE video, and I'm going to say it again here. Present-day people, particularly Western developers, should learn from these older games and from Eastern developers. Since this is a review of Resident Evil 0, then I'm going to give it my blue thumbs up. It is a good game, but I wouldn't recommend it to everyone, particularly those that haven't played Resident Evil in any form or surviving horror games of any type. If you're going to play classic RE games, simply start with RE1, and if you liked that one as much as I did, and simply want more of that style of game, then go ahead and play this one without thinking it twice. But do not start here, simply because controlling 2 characters at the same time is better when you are experienced controlling one. So learn with the first game, get good with a knife, and with said mastery approach this new challenge with open arms. Do not be afraid of seeking help. The community guides is what gave me most of the useful tips that helped me beat this game. And for the love of Umbrella Corporation, do not play this game on hard for the first time. That was my mistake. Hard mode is better tackled when already experienced with the game. Now, if you've reached the end of this video, thank you. I hope you had a good time with me, as I had with you. Making this video was a pleasant but challenging experience, mainly due to the many topics I covered and therefore the length of the video. Let me know what you think about this longer format. Not all my future videos will be as long because not all scripts need to be. But if you liked this one the way that it is, I wouldn't mind making longer videos in the future either. My next video will certainly be shorter, and in that one I plan on covering the idea of an RE0 remake and a second remake to RE1. A sort of wishlist, if you prefer. Until then, however, stay safe and Happy New Year.